On an ordinary Norfolk morning, a single-dad janitor stepped onto a bus, with his little girl never expecting destiny to sit just a few rows away. A young Navy officer on a secret mission. 2 dangerous men closing in. And a child's trembling whisper that changed everything. "Daddy, please help her." What followed was a moment that stunned an entire Navy command and revealed a past no one was prepared for. This is the story of quiet heroism, hidden wounds, and a family rebuilt from the ashes of secrets. Before we begin this unforgettable journey, we invite you to support our channel by subscribing. Your support helps us continue sharing heartwarming stories of kindness, courage, and second chances. Thank you for being here. Now let's begin the story. The morning sun had only begun to stretch across Norfolk when Harris and Fordham locked the door of their small rental duplex. The neighborhood was quiet, clean lawns, old oak trees, the smell of dew still clinging to the air. Yet something about the stillness always felt like a familiar companion to him. Silence had been his landscape for years. He understood it, lived in it. But beside him, skipping lightly on the concrete, was the person who made any silence softer. "Daddy, look," Ella lifted her hand toward a streak of golden sunlight. "It looks like the sky's waking up." Harrison smiled, one of those gentle, fleeting smiles that came from somewhere, deep somewhere, still healing. "I think you're right, sweetheart. Even the sky needs a slow start." Ella giggled, her soft blonde curls bouncing. She wore her favorite red shirt and too big backpack that looked like it wanted to swallow her whole. 7 years old, but with a heart that felt older than time, empathetic in ways children usually weren't. Maybe she'd learned it from him. Maybe she was born with it. Either way, she was his anchor. They walked toward the bus stop together. Harrison's boots hit the pavement with a measured rhythm, steady, deliberate. A rhythm learned long ago in a world he no longer talked about. Norfolk was filled with military air uniforms and stories, but Harrison kept his own story tucked away behind calm eyes and worn-in fatigues. At the corner, the city bus approached with a familiar hiss. They boarded, and Harrison instinctively scanned the interior. It wasn't a threatening scan, more like the quiet reading of a room by someone who'd lived too long relying on instinct. A mother with a stroller. A pair of students muttering about exams. A sailor half asleep against the window. Ordinary. Yet Harrison always checked. He chose a seat halfway down the aisle where he could see both exits. Ella climbed into the seat across from him, swinging her legs happily. The bus lurched forward, and sunlight filtered in through the windows, bathing them in a warm gold. "Daddy, can we get pancakes this weekend?" Ella asked. "If we survive the school week." "Maybe." Harrison's eyes softened. Extra syrup. Her grin exploded. Obviously. She leaned back, humming a tune only she seemed to know, while Harrison let his gaze shift outside. Buildings slid by, sailors walking to morning duty, retirees jogging along the sidewalk, a world moving onward, quiet but full. He inhaled deeply. A good day. A safe day. For a man like him, safe days were a blessing. But what he didn't know, not yet, was that fate had already begun rearranging itself. And the first thread of change stepped onto the bus at the next stop. The doors opened with a metallic clatter. A young woman entered, tall, poised, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying the unmistakable bearing of someone trained by the Navy. Her posture precise, her eyes alert. She looked confident, but beneath that confidence, something flickered, tension maybe, or caution. Faye Emerson. She took a seat near the middle, purposefully close to 2 men slouched in the back. She didn't look at them, but her shoulders stiffened ever so slightly. Harrison noticed. He didn't stare, didn't pry. But something about the scene nudged the old instincts awake, the ones that read danger long before it arrived. Not danger in the way most people recognized it, but danger in shifts of energy, in eyes that flicked too often toward a target in hands too still. Ella leaned forward. "Daddy, is something wrong?" Harrison offered a calm smile. "Nothing you need to worry about." And it was true, at least for now. But he kept watching. Faye pretended to check her phone, but Harrison saw it the smallest tremor in her fingers. Fear disguised as routine. A subtle breath she held too long before releasing. She's undercover, Harrison realized. His mind, still sharp with the silent discipline of his old life, began to assemble the picture. The way the two men whispered without moving their lips, the way one kept adjusting the sleeve of his jacket, like hiding something beneath it, the way Faye positioned herself within escape range of the aisle. Something was brewing. Something she feared might erupt. Ella followed his gaze and frowned thoughtfully. "Daddy?" She looked sad. Harrison's heart tightened, because Ella always noticed feelings before facts, before logic, before danger. He didn't answer. Instead, he listened to the hum of the wheels, to the slight shift in weight near the back, to Faye's inhalation growing sharper. The sunlit calm of the Norfolk morning dimmed just a little. As the bus rolled on, Harrison's fingers brushed lightly against his knee, the smallest, almost unconscious gesture he often made before conflict. A ghost of muscle memory. A whisper from the past he had tried to leave behind. Faye reached for something in her pocket. Harrison caught the movement without even turning his head. She wasn't grabbing a weapon. She was sending a signal. A silent SOS. Something cold and certain slid into place inside him. Ella, oblivious, whispered to herself as she counted cars outside the window. But fate was already tightening its grip, drawing every life on this bus toward a moment none of them could anticipate, except maybe the man who had once lived in the shadows of the country he served. Harrison exhaled slowly. A familiar calm washed over him, not because he wanted to be part of whatever was coming, but because he might not have a choice. Not when Ella was here. Not when a young woman was trembling behind her composed facade. Not when danger was walking steadily across the bus floorboards. The moment was approaching. Quietly. Inevitably. And the first domino would fall with a single quiet plea from a little girl who always saw the truth before anyone else. But that moment belonged to the next chapter. For now, the morning bus carried its passengers onward toward a destiny about to unfold. Faye Emerson had rehearsed this assignment in her head 100 times, calmly, methodically, just as she'd been trained. But the moment she stepped onto the morning bus, something in the air reminded her how unpredictable the real world could be, especially when danger hid in plain sight. She scanned the passengers with practiced subtlety. None of them mattered. Only two faces did. Holt and Irwin. They sat near the back, slouched in the way men slouch when they want to look relaxed, but can't quite shake the weight of guilt. Holt kept a baseball cap low over his brow. Irwin wore a jacket too warm for the season. Sleeves stretched something bulkier than it should have been beneath the fabric. She recognized the way their eyes moved, small, sharp sweeps, searching for threats they hoped wouldn't come. This was the closest she'd ever been to them. Too close. But the Navy needed evidence, and Norfolk PD needed confirmation, so she had boarded the bus as if she were just another commuter, a young woman in jeans, a cardigan, a backpack, with nothing alarming about it. Except for the micro camera hidden under the strap. Except for the thin transmitter inside her pocket. Except for the knot of anxiety twisting inside her chest. She sat in the aisle seat diagonal from them, close enough to hear any conversation, but far enough to avoid suspicion. At least, that was the plan. She kept her breathing steady. But her heart, traitorous as always, betrayed her. It thudded beneath her ribs, a long, silent warning. She wished it would stop. She wished she could switch it off the way intelligence officers in movies did. But she wasn't a movie agent. She was a real woman with real fear. And Holt and Irwin were real criminals who had already hurt people. Her fingers tightened around her backpack strap. She forced her shoulders down, tried to look bored instead of alert. The bus jostled over a pothole and the micro camera tilted. She adjusted it with a casual swipe of her hand. Then it happened. Holt's head turned slow, deliberate. His eyes scanned the aisle and landed on her. Not for long. Not enough for a normal passenger to notice. But Faye noticed. She noticed everything. Her pulse spiked. He knows. He knows someone is watching. She reached into her pocket, brushing her thumb against the flat transmitter. One press would send a silent SOS signal straight to the base. Backup would mobilize. Commander Everett herself might see it. But pressing it meant admitting she was losing control of the situation. And she hated losing control. Then Irwin leaned toward Holt, murmuring something too soft to hear. But Faye read lips not military-trained, but self-taught in the way bored kids learn odd things online. Camera. Her stomach dropped. They'd seen it. Or sensed it. Or maybe they were simply paranoid enough to suspect surveillance everywhere. Either way, she had seconds. Maybe less. She shifted slightly, angling her body away. She kept her face, blank eyes out the window. Her fingers moved in the pocket, inching toward the SOS button. She rehearsed the motion silently. Steady. Smooth. Don't startle them. But before she pressed it, she sensed someone watching her. Not Holt. Not Irwin. Someone else. Her eyes lifted and met the quiet, unreadable gaze of the man sitting 3 rows ahead. She'd noticed him when she boarded tall, steady, and worn olive fatigues that didn't quite match any current uniform. His posture too disciplined for a civilian. His eyes had scanned the bus with the ease of someone who'd spent years reading danger in every shadow. She had assumed he was another retired service member. She hadn't expected him to be watching her now. His gaze wasn't suspicious. It was understanding, as if he saw right through her facade and understood exactly what kind of fear she was swallowing. She looked away immediately, cheeks warming. Focus. Stay on task. But his presence lingered at the edge of her awareness, calm, grounded, the opposite of the storm, gathering at the back of the bus. She forced herself to breathe one controlled breath at a time. Holt shifted. Irwin nudged him. Their interest had sharpened, honed to a point. They were whispering now, trading glances not at her camera, but at her. Her hand tightened around the transmitter. Time was up. She pressed the SOS. A soft vibration signaled that the message had been sent. She exhaled once, shaky but determined. Now, all she had to do was stay alive until help arrived. That thought should have reassured her. But instead, fear coiled tighter. Because Holt rose from his seat. Irwin followed, not rushing, not attacking, just walking toward her. Slow, deliberate steps, the kind that made a person's blood run cold. Faye forced herself not to move, not to flinch, not to reveal that every instinct screamed for her to run. She slid her phone into her hand, pretending to scroll. Her fingers trembled. Relax, she told herself silently. You've trained for this. But training had never prepared her for the sudden, crushing realization that she might not get out of this bus alive. Her throat tightened. Her vision sharpened unnaturally. She felt the weight of 2 predators approaching. And then a small voice whispered across the aisle, a child's whisper, so gentle it pierced the tension like a bell in fog. Daddy, please help her. Faye blinked. The world seemed to shift, tilt-freeze just for a second. Daddy, her gaze snapped forward. The quiet man she'd noticed earlier, the one with the calm eyes, was already rising from his seat. with no hesitation, with no uncertainty, as if he'd been waiting for that moment, as if he'd known exactly what was coming. He stepped into the aisle with the steady, lethal grace of someone who no longer needed training manuals or checklists. Someone who had once lived in a world where shadows meant danger, and where he had been the answer to that danger. Faye's breath caught. Who was he? For a split second, the bus seemed to hold its breath. The hum of the engine, the sunlight flickering through the windows, the rhythm of wheels against pavement, all of it faded into a muffled blur. Only one sound remained clear. Pure. Innocent. Impossible to ignore. "Daddy, please help her." Ella's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the unmistakable clarity of a child who saw danger long before adults admitted it existed. A voice strong enough to cut through fear, and strong enough to awaken a part of Harrison Fordham he had spent years burying. Harrison didn't move quickly. He moved quietly, smoothly, like a man who had resolved something deep within himself long before standing up. The shift in his posture was subtle. Weight, forward, shoulders, loose. Gaze, steady, but the air around him changed instantly. The calmness he carried sharpened, deepened. It was the kind of calm that came not from the absence of fear, but mastery of it. Faye felt it. Holt and Irwin felt it. Everyone who had spent enough time around real danger would have felt it. Harrison stepped into the aisle, placing himself between Ella and the approaching threat, without even thinking about it. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't aggression. It was instinct. A father's instinct with the training of someone far more dangerous. Harrison raised his hands slightly, palms open. Not defensive, just careful. "You gentlemen need something," Holt smirked, cracking his neck. "Lady's been poking her nose where it doesn't belong." Irwin added, "Just want to have a little chat." On a bus full of kids and commuters, Harrison asked gently, voice level. "Doesn't seem like a smart place to start trouble." Holt took another step. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Some kind of hero," Harrison shook his head. "Just a dad trying to make sure everyone gets where they need to go." It should have sounded meek. It didn't. It sounded like a warning, a final one. Faye swallowed hard. Her fingers dug into the strap of her bag. She knew she should say something, identify herself, assert control over the situation, but her throat wouldn't cooperate. She could barely breathe. This wasn't in the training manuals. This wasn't surveillance. This was survival. And the man standing in front of her, he wasn't ordinary. Not even close. Holt lunged first. Sloppy, emotional, predictable. Harrison moved before most passengers even registered the motion. He stepped aside, redirecting Holt's momentum with a small turn of his shoulder. Holt's arm swung past him harmlessly, like someone trying to punch fog. In the same fluid movement, Harrison caught his wrist, twisted, and guided him downward. Not violently, just decisively. Holt collapsed onto a seat, gasping. Irwin reacted next, grabbing Harrison's jacket. A bad mistake. Harrison's grip locked onto Irwin's forearm. He rotated his hips, redirecting the force as if Irwin weighed nothing. In a blink, Irwin was bent forward, his arm immobilized, his balance gone. The entire exchange lasted less than 4 seconds. 4 seconds that rewrote everything Faye thought she knew about him. The bus went silent. A mother hugged her child closer. A sailor blinked hard, unsure what he had just seen. Ella watched without fear. She'd always known her father was capable of more than he admitted. Harrison released Irwin gently but firmly, making sure both men were down and unable to re-engage. "No more," he said softly. It wasn't a threat. It was a boundary, a line neither Holt nor Irwin could cross again. But the danger wasn't finished. Holt, red-faced with humiliation, reached inside his jacket. Faye's heart jumped. Her breath froze. Her legs wouldn't move. Harrison did. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, intercepting Holt's hand before it could pull anything out. A sharp twist disarmed him, revealing only a phone. Not a weapon. But the intent had been clear enough. "Sit," Harrison said, voice steady. Perhaps it was the tone, calm, controlled, fatherly, but Holt obeyed. Irwin did too. Something in both of them understood that, whatever this man was, he wasn't to be tested again. A few passengers clapped nervously. Others whispered. A child murmured, "Whoa." But Faye couldn't speak. She couldn't even stand. She stared at Harrison as if seeing a ghost from her textbooks, some figure whispered about in naval halls. Men who carried themselves with effortless precision. Men who used force, not with ego but purpose. "Are you hurt?" Harrison asked her softly, his voice returning to the warmth he used with his daughter. Faye shook her head, breath trembling. "How did you?" He offered a small, tired smile. "Just a dad." The same answer as before. But this time, she didn't believe it for a second. Ella hopped off her seat and wrapped her hand around his. "Daddy is. She okay?" "Yes," he whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "Thanks to you." Faye felt her eyes sting, unexpected, unprofessional. She swallowed the emotion quickly. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Harrison replied quietly. "Just stay seated until help arrives." "How do you know backup is coming?" she asked before she could stop herself. He looked at her, a deep, knowing look that pierced the air between them. "Because you pressed an SOS," he answered. Her heart stuttered. "How did you?" He didn't answer. "Because the bus suddenly flooded with blue lights. A convoy, multiple vehicles, officers, MPs, and then a woman stepped inside. Commander Helena Everett, sharp, commanding, eyes like steel polished by grief. Her gaze swept the scene until it landed on Harrison and froze. Shock, recognition, memory. Something old and unspoken rippled between them. Faye felt it immediately, and her world shifted again. This quiet janitor, this gentle father, this man who moved like wind and steel. He wasn't just a hero. He was someone far more dangerous, far more important, far more known at least to this commander, her mother. And everything was about to unravel. The bus had never felt so still. Commander Helena Everett stood framed in the doorway, sunlight slicing around her like a halo of authority. Her uniform, crisp, immaculate, carrying years of weight and sacrifice, commanded attention the moment she entered. Officers behind her moved in disciplined formation, but she didn't need them to make the bus feel smaller. Her presence alone did that. Her eyes locked first onto her daughter Faye, who sat frozen, breath-shaky fear still trembling beneath her composure. A flicker of relief crossed the commander's face, fast, soft, almost invisible. Then her gaze shifted, to him, to Harrison Fordham, and something changed in her posture, a quiet stilling, a recognition she didn't voice. "Secure the suspects," Helena ordered without looking away from Harrison. Officers rushed past her, restraining Holt and Irwin, who didn't resist. Not after what just happened. Not after the man who wasn't supposed to be anyone had dismantled them without breaking a sweat. Faye watched her mother, confusion tightening her chest. Why is she looking at him like that? Helena approached slowly, her boots firm on the metal floor. The bus whispered with the movement, passengers pressing back, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Faye swallowed. "Commander Everett, Mom, he saved my life." Helena gave a small nod without breaking eye contact with Harrison. "I'm aware." "Then why are you?" "Because," Helena said quietly, "I know exactly who he is." The words hit the bus like a muted thunder. Faye blinked. "You know him?" But Harrison looked away, jaw tight, like a man quietly bracing for a door from his past to be forced open. Helena stopped in front of him. Her voice dropped to something low. Private waited. Ghost line. Correct. Ella didn't understand the word. Faye didn't either. But the way both men in restraints stiffened, the way two MPs halted mid-motion, the way Harrison closed his eyes for one slow breath, it said everything. Ghost line. A name whispered in Navy intelligence circles, buried in classified reports, taught to young officers as myth more than fact. It wasn't a unit. It was a shadow of a unit. The kind that shouldn't exist. The kind built for strategic ghosts, people who could read threats before they happened, who could end a conflict before it began. And Harrison had been one of them. Faye stared at him as if seeing a different man entirely. Her savior. Ella's father. The quiet janitor who walked his daughter to school each morning. Ghost line. She felt the floor tilt beneath her. Helena exhaled once, long, weary. You vanished, she said softly. No one in the Pentagon could track you down. No one in the Navy could even confirm if you were alive. Good. Harrison murmured, eyes still lowered. That was the point. Ella held his hand tighter, sensing something heavy she didn't understand. The commander's expression softened, not with pity, but with something more complicated. Respect. Sadness. Regret. You shouldn't have had to disappear, Harrison. He met her gaze for the first time, a storm behind his calm eyes. You know why I left? Helena nodded slowly. Of course she knew. She'd known the day he walked away from the uniform, and from the grief no man should have had to hold alone. Faye's breath caught in her throat. Who are you, Harrison Fordham? But she didn't ask. She couldn't. The weight of what she was hearing pressed too heavy on her chest. Helena's voice turned colder, not to him, but to the room. Everyone on this bus is to remain seated until debrief. Officers will escort them one by one. The passengers nodded quickly, but Harrison stepped forward. Ella needs to get to school. Helena's jaw tensed. It wasn't an argument she was used to. Faye opened her mouth. Mom. Fordham. Helena interrupted her tone, shifting back into commander mode. You're involved in a federal investigation now. You don't get to just walk out. Harrison lifted Ella into his arms. The movement was gentle, protective, and it shifted something inside Helena. A crack in the armor. Harrison, she said, quietly dropping the formality. I'm not trying to punish you. He didn't respond. Not with words. Only silence. The kind that made Faye's chest ache. The kind that said he had nothing left to give to the world he once served. Helena studied him for a moment longer before sighing. Officers, let them step outside. I'll speak with them privately. The MPs hesitated. No one disobeyed a commander, but then followed orders. Harrison walked down the aisle, Ella's small arms wrapped around his neck. Faye followed, eyes never leaving him. Outside, the morning sun was harsher than before. Bright. Exposing. They stood a few feet from the bus, the quiet veteran, his daughter, the young officer he had saved, and the commander, whose gaze held more history than words could express. Helena addressed him carefully. Thank you for protecting my daughter. Faye stiffened. Mom, what? Helena didn't look at her. Not yet. I owe you a debt I can't repay, Harrison. He shook his head. No debts. No recognition. Just let me take my daughter home. Home, Faye repeated softly, trying to read the man whose walls were higher than any she'd ever seen. Is that what all this is? Just your life now? Harrison didn't answer. His silence was its own confession. A man hiding in simplicity. A soldier fleeing ghosts. A father clinging to the last piece of his soul, Ella. Helena nodded slowly, as if making a decision she'd been avoiding for years. Harrison. Ghost line or not, you can't keep running from the past forever. He met her eyes with a quiet pain only someone who had lost everything could carry. Watch me. And with that, he walked away. Ella holding his hand, the world holding its breath. Faye watched him go, heart pounding with a feeling she couldn't name. Admiration, curiosity, a strange rising warmth, and a whisper of fate she didn't understand yet. She looked at her mother. Helena's expression was carved with something almost haunted. Mom Faye whispered, "Who is he really?" Helena closed her eyes. "A man," she said softly, "we never should have lost." The flashing lights outside the bus scattered across the street like fractured stars. Norfolk morning traffic slowed, curious drivers leaning out windows, unsure whether they were witnessing an arrest, an accident, or something far more complicated. Commander Helena Everett stepped down from the bus last. The moment her boots hit the pavement, the officers waiting outside snapped to attention. She didn't acknowledge them. Her gaze followed only one direction toward Harrison, who stood a few yards away with Ella on his hip. Faye lingered close, torn between relief and confusion. Helena's posture was the picture of control, but something in her controlled too much like a dam holding back a flood. "Secure the perimeter," she instructed sharply. Her officers immediately fanned out. Civilians were ushered away. Holt and Irwin were dragged into a patrol vehicle, still wincing from Harrison's effortless takedown. Yet Helena didn't look at them. Her eyes were fixed on the man who had slipped through the Navy's fingers years ago. Harrison Fordham, a name erased from every roster, a ghost in every classified file, a man whose disappearance had stirred questions no one dared ask aloud. Faye approached cautiously. "Mom, what happens now?" Helena didn't answer immediately. She stepped closer to Harrison, her expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, one quiet, fragile heartbeat, there was a connection between them that Faye couldn't interpret. Recognition, history, respect wrapped in sorrow, Harrison Helena said at last. He met her stare without flinching. "Commander?" Ella, curious, looked back and forth between them. "Daddy, do you know her?" Harrison exhaled slowly. "We've crossed paths. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either." Helena studied him, a study layered with memories she had no right to hold on to, and regrets she had carried for far too long. "We received your SOS, she said, shifting her attention to Faye for a heartbeat. "Though it appears you handled the situation before we even arrived." "He saved me," Faye said softly, eyes drifting toward the spot on the bus where everything had unfolded. "Mom," he stopped them like he'd done it 1,000 times. Helena's jaw tightened. "He has." Faye turned sharply. "Has what?" But Helena wasn't ready to answer. Harrison adjusted Ella in his arms. She tucked her head against his shoulder, sensing the tension rising like heat on asphalt. She didn't understand it. She didn't need to. All she needed was her father's heartbeat beneath her ear. "I don't want trouble," Harrison said quietly. "I didn't ask to be part of this." "You didn't cause trouble," Helena replied. "You prevented a disaster." And I'm glad he said. But Ella needs to get to school. She doesn't need more eyes on her. At the mention of his daughter, Helena softened barely, but enough for Faye to notice. Enough for memories to resurface. Helena remembered Harrison before what happened. Before he broke, before grief took him apart from the inside. She remembered the man who fought like a weapon, but lived like a father. Harrison. Helena began choosing her words carefully. "There are questions we need answered, and there are answers I won't give," he replied. Their voices were low but firm, two people speaking from different sides of a shared wound. Faye watched them, unease tightening her stomach. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked, her voice fragile. Neither answered. An officer approached Helena. "Commander, we need your authorization to move the suspects to the base holding facility. Norfolk PD also wants jurisdiction. Apparently, they've been investigating these two for months. Transfer them to naval custody, Helena said. They were targeting my officer. This is ours now. Faye blinked. Mom, did you just call me a Navy officer? Helena said briskly, which is what you are. But her voice cracked at the edges, betraying a truth she was still hiding. Harrison watched the exchange with quiet understanding. Pain flickered behind Helena's eyes. Pain he understood too well. That was when Helena turned her full focus back to him. You put yourself and your daughter in danger today, she said. Though her voice wasn't accusatory, it was weary, heavy. But without you, Faye might not be standing here. Harrison shifted Ella gently. No one hurts someone in front of my kid. That's the rule. Ella nodded matter-of-factly. Daddy always keeps people safe. Helena's throat tightened. Faye inhaled shakily. Dad, I mean Harrison. How did you know what they were going to do before they even moved? He looked at her, calm, honest, and heartbreakingly distant. Because I've spent a lifetime watching men like them. Faye felt chills crawl down her arms. Helena closed the remaining distance between them, her voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. Harrison? Ghostline didn't end the day you walked away. He stiffened. Ella felt it. Faye saw it. The past, still sharp, still alive, flashed through him like a silent lightning bolt. I'm not Ghostline anymore, Harrison murmured. You'll always be Ghostline, Helena replied. Some things don't fade. Harrison tore his gaze away. Some things have to. Helena looked at Ella, small, golden-haired innocent, and finally understood why Harrison had run so far away from the world that once demanded everything of him. He had chosen to save the only thing left that mattered. His child. Harrison Helena said gently, I'm not here to drag you back. I'm here because today showed me something I wasn't prepared for. What's that? That the world still needs men like you. He shook his head. No, it doesn't. Faye swallowed. Maybe some people do. Her voice was soft, too soft. But Harrison heard it, and so did Helena. Officers returned, signaling that the suspects were secured. The street was clearing. Civilians were gone. Only the four of them remained bound by fate, history pain, and something unspoken that hung in the crisp Norfolk air. Helena took a slow breath. Harrison, you and I have unfinished business. I have no business left, he said. But Helena only shook her head. You can tell yourself that she murmured, but ghosts don't stay buried forever. And as Harrison carried Ella away, his steps steady but heavy, Faye felt something shift inside her, something she couldn't name yet, but knew would change everything. The morning had ended. The shadows had only begun. The interrogation room was quiet enough to hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Cold steel walls, a single table, 2 chairs, one occupied by Commander Helena Everett, the other conspicuously empty. Harrison had refused to sit. He preferred to stand near the back wall, arms lightly crossed, posture calm but guarded. Faye sat beside him, fingers interlocked, still processing everything unfolding around her. Ella sat on Harrison's lap, yawning occasionally, her head resting against his chest. She didn't understand the gravity of the room or the shadows hanging between the adults. She only knew she was safe because her father was there. Helena cleared her throat, breaking the silence. We should talk now, Harrison. All of us. He said nothing. Faye glanced between them two people who clearly knew far more about each other than either was saying. Helena began with the one question she had held for years. Why did you disappear? Harrison exhaled through his nose, gaze steady but distant. You know why? I know what the report said, Helena replied, voice tight. But I want to hear it from you. Reports don't tell the truth. His tone was quiet but edged with pain. Reports told everyone I burned out, that I was unreliable, that I abandoned my post. You and I both know that's not what happened. Faye's brows furrowed. She wasn't sure she should be hearing this, but she couldn't look away. Helena's voice softened a rare fissure in her iron composure. Harrison, you lost your wife on a mission that should never have involved her. You lost half your team because someone higher up ignored your warnings. You didn't fail. You were failed. Harrison's jaw tightened. Ella sensed his shift and curled closer. Faye's breath caught. His wife, Helena continued. What happened to you was wrong. You deserved better. Harrison's voice cracked just slightly. But I didn't get better. I got silence. I got a folded flag and a daughter who needed someone to hold her through nightmares I didn't know how to soothe. His hand stroked Ella's hair. I left because I couldn't serve a system that broke the only family I had left. Helena lowered her eyes. I tried to tell them that. I tried to defend you. Ghostline wasn't built for grief. They didn't know how to handle a man who still had a heart. A humorless smile touched Harrison's lips. Ghostline wasn't built for people. It was built for shadows. Faye whispered, Ghostline. What is that? What were you? Helena looked at her daughter with the weight of years in her eyes. Ghostline was a covert strategy unit, not just soldiers, thinkers. Analysts with instincts sharper than weapons. They predicted threats before they happened, resolved crises before they reached headlines. And Harrison Faye asked quietly. Harrison, Helena said, was the best of them. Faye stared at him in disbelief. But you're a janitor. Harrison chuckled softly. It's quieter work. Why didn't you tell anyone who you were? She pressed. Because that man, Harrison said, voice gentle but hollow, died with my wife. What's left is Ella's dad. That's enough. The room fell silent again. Faye watched him, her heart stretching with something deep and inexplicable. Respect, sorrow, admiration. Then Helena leaned back, an unreadable look crossing her face. Part memory, part regret. You know, she murmured to Harrison, you once saved my life. Faye blinked. What? Harrison stiffened. That was a long time ago. It was still real, Helena said. A night operation off the Azores. Our communications failed. My team walked straight into an ambush. You came out of nowhere like smoke. Her eyes darkened. You dragged me out of that hell. Faye looked at Harrison with fresh wonder. Is that true? Harrison didn't answer. Helena did. Yes. He carried me on his back for 2 miles with shrapnel in his arm, and then he ordered extraction for everyone else before even letting a medic touch him. Ella lifted her head. Daddy got hurt. Just a scratch, Harrison murmured. Helena shook her head. It was not just a scratch. It was nearly your entire arm. He ignored that. Faye stared at him, seeing the quiet, gentle man in a completely new light. Why didn't you take credit, or medals, or recognition? He met her gaze calmly. Because none of it brings people back. The room thickened with emotion. Helena clasped her hands tightly. Harrison, the world broke you. And you didn't want to break others in return. That's rare. He let the silence speak for him. Finally, Helena stood. Her voice softened into something almost maternal, something Faye barely recognized. You didn't deserve what happened to you, Harrison. But you saved my daughter today. And I need you to understand. I owe you more than I can ever repay. Harrison shook his head. No debts. No favors. Just let us leave. But Helena stepped closer, lowering her voice. You may not want the Navy back in your life, but the Navy hasn't forgotten you, Harrison's eyes hardened. "Ghostline is dead," Helena replied softly. "Ghosts don't die. They return when needed." Faye shivered, not from fear, but from the weight of truth settling around them. And Harrison? He simply looked away, as if bracing for a storm he hoped would never come. But storms don't ask for permission. And the one about to crash into all their lives had already begun forming in the shadows. Commander Helena Everett hadn't been rattled by anything in years. She had survived ambushes, classified missions, political pressure, and every steel-cold challenge the Navy demanded. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared her for facing her daughter in this small, quiet room. Not as a commander, but as a mother. Faye sat across from her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She had been calm during interrogations, during missions, during the confrontation on the bus. But not now. Not with the way Helena kept avoiding her eyes. Mom, Faye whispered, "What exactly are you not telling me?" Helena inhaled slowly. The question had been floating between them since the moment they stepped off the bus. She had hoped to deal with the suspects first, with Harrison second, and with her daughter last. But fate didn't allow that order. "Faye," Helena began, her voice faltering something it never did. "There's a truth I've held for 20 years, a truth I promised myself I would reveal only when the moment came." "Then why now?" Faye asked softly. "Because Harrison saw it." Faye blinked, confused. Saw what Helena closed the folder in front of her, a folder she had kept unopened for almost 2 decades. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. No more lies. She slid the file across the table. Faye stared at it. Her name, her birth date, her infant photo, and below it, adopted confidential Order 17. Her breath caught. What is this?" Helena's throat tightened as she tried to speak. "Faye, sweetheart, you were never supposed to get hurt by the choices I made." Faye felt as if the floor beneath her had vanished. "Mom, am I adopted?" Helena nodded. A small sound escaped Faye's lips, half gasp, half cry, because she had never once suspected she wasn't Helena's biological daughter. They looked alike. They moved alike. They shared the same sharp brows, the same determined jaw, the same stubborn strength. But why, Faye whispered, voice trembling. "Why would you give me away and then take me back?" Helena swallowed hard. "I never gave you away. I hid you. I hid you from the people who would have used you to destroy me." Faye stared at her. "Used me." How Helena's eyes glistened with the pain of 20 years. "When I was a young officer, I was assigned to a classified mission involving a corrupt intelligence sector. We uncovered a leak, someone selling strategic naval data. When they realized I was close to exposing them, they targeted me." "And me?" Faye asked with a trembling voice. "You were a newborn," Helena whispered. "I had just become a mother. I didn't know who I could trust. So I went to the one man who had saved my life once before." Faye's eyes widened. "Harrison." "No," Helena answered. "His wife." Faye blinked. "His wife?" Helena nodded, the memory heavy. Her name was Leah. She was kind, warm, everything the world needed more of. I trusted her in a way I trusted almost no one else. She agreed to take you in until I finished the mission." Faye's voice cracked. And after the mission, Helena looked away, tears pooling, but refusing to fall. The mission succeeded. But then, tragedy struck. Leah died unexpectedly in an accident. Harrison had just buried the woman he loved, and suddenly he was caring for 2 babies. Faye froze. 2 babies, you and Ella, Helena whispered. "He raised you both for a few months while I fought to secure a safe life for you. But when the time came, when I finally took you back, Harrison asked only one thing of me. What Faye whispered. That I let him stay in your life. Helena's voice trembled. He wanted to be a part of your world. He loved you like you were his own. Faye's vision blurred. Then why didn't he stay? Helena shut her eyes, pain tightening her jaw. Because the mission that killed his wife destroyed him. And when he disappeared from the Navy, he disappeared from you too. The silence in the room thickened, sharp, suffocating, irreversible. Faye pressed a hand to her chest, trying to breathe through the shock. All these years, I thought I was just your daughter. You are, Helena insisted, in every way that matters. Blood doesn't define family, Faye. Love does. But you lied, Faye whispered. For 20 years. Helena felt those words like a blade. I thought I was protecting you, she said softly. From enemies, from the past, from pain. Faye shook her head, slowly. Tears falling now despite her efforts to control them. All this time, I've been searching for who I am, where I belong, and the person who could have helped me. Harrison never said a word, because he believed it was the right thing, Helena answered. He thought I could give you a safer life, a stable one. He didn't want to confuse you. Faye wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel right now. I don't expect forgiveness, Helena whispered. Only understanding. Faye's voice was trembling but honest. How long did you plan to keep this from me? Helena's answer was a quiet, devastating truth. As long as it took to keep you safe. Faye looked down at the file again at the infant photo of a face she recognized only from distant, forgotten dreams. A tiny girl with wide eyes like hers. Eyes like Harrison's daughter. No eyes like her own. She stood slowly. Her legs shook, but she steadied herself with the table. I need air, Faye whispered. Faye, but she was already walking toward the door, the truth heavy on her shoulders. As she stepped out, she saw Harrison standing in the hallway with Ella. He looked at her, and Faye realized. He knew. He had always known. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came, not when he gave her the softest, most heartbreaking nod. A nod that said, I'm sorry you had to learn this way. I've always cared. You were never alone. Faye felt something break inside her, something that might take a lifetime to heal. The walk back to Harrison's small duplex was silent at first. Silent in the heavy way people carry truths they never asked for. Faye walked a few steps behind him, her mind still unraveling everything she had learned, everything she had never been told. Ella held her father's hand and glanced back at Faye occasionally, as if sensing the young officer's shaken heart. When they reached the front porch, Harrison unlocked the door quietly and stepped inside. He didn't turn on the lights. The late afternoon sun drifted across the living room in soft, golden streaks, illuminating the small, warm space filled with humble comforts. A stack of children's books, Ella's drawings taped proudly along the wall, a low bookshelf overflowing with second-hand novels, a life built from simplicity and survival. Would you like to come in? Harrison finally asked, turning toward Faye. His voice was gentle, not pushing, not assuming, simply offering a place to breathe. Faye nodded. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, feeling the world soften just a little. Ella tugged on Faye's sleeve. Are you sad? The question pierced her heart more deeply than anything Helena had said. Faye knelt down and brushed a strand of hair behind Ella's ear. A little bit. Ella nodded with the kind of wisdom children sometimes carry without knowing. Daddy says sad things don't last forever if you sit with people who care. Harrison cleared his throat, slightly embarrassed. I may have said something like that. Faye smiled, small, fragile, genuine. He's right. She stood, her gaze drifting to the framed photograph on the mantel, a woman with dark hair and kind eyes holding a baby. The picture was old edges worn. "Is this Leah?" she whispered. Harrison nodded. "Ella's mother." The room grew quiet. Faye approached the photo and traced the outline of the woman's smile with her eyes. "She looks gentle." "She was," Harrison replied softly. "Gentle, steady, fiercely loyal. She loved with her whole heart." Faye felt emotion pinch her throat. "I wish I had known her." Harrison hesitated before sinking into the armchair. "She knew you. For a short while, anyway." Faye froze. Harrison looked up, meeting her eyes with a blend of sorrow and truth. Before the mission went wrong, before everything changed, she held you, fed you, sang you to sleep when Helena couldn't risk being seen. Faye's breath trembled. He continued gently. "You were part of our world, even if you don't remember it." A single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Ella climbed onto the sofa beside Faye and leaned against her. "It's okay to cry. Daddy says crying is like cleaning your heart." Faye let out a broken laugh, half joy, half grief. He's right again. The warmth in the room settled deeper. Harrison watched them, Ella clinging to the girl who had once been part of their household, and Faye letting her guard down for the first time since the truth shattered her world. Something inside him shifted too. There was a silence, but not the heavy kind this time. It was a stillness full of possibility. After a few minutes, Faye looked up. "Harrison, why did you never tell me?" He took a slow breath. "Because I didn't want to confuse your life. Helena gave you stability, education, a clear path. You had a future I couldn't give you at that time." "That's not the whole reason," Faye said gently. He nodded, conceding. "And because I was broken. I didn't want you to grow up around that. I wanted you safe from enemies, from ghosts, from me. You were never a danger to me." "No," he whispered, "but my world was." Another silence, another truth settling between them. Ella suddenly brightened. "Are you staying for dinner?" "We have spaghetti. Daddy makes good spaghetti. But I stir the sauce, so I'm the helper chef." Faye laughed, a real one this time. "I'd love to stay." Harrison hesitated. Inviting someone into his home, into the small world he had fought to protect, was not something he did lightly. But something about Faye's presence felt familiar, fitting like a door he had once closed, but now found himself standing in front of again. "Spaghetti it is," he said. The kitchen came alive with simple warmth. Ella stood on her little stool, stirring the pot with proud concentration. Harrison chopped vegetables quietly, and Faye leaned against the counter, watching them with a softness she hadn't felt in years. "You two look like you've been doing this forever," she murmured. Harrison shrugged. "Ella likes routines. They help. What about you? Do routines help you too?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Some days." Faye stepped closer, and today his hands paused for a moment. He looked at her. Really looked. Today feels different. Her chest warmed. They moved around the kitchen together, occasionally brushing shoulders, exchanging glances that lingered a little too long, speaking without speaking. Ella hummed happily. As she stirred the sauce, a small domestic melody weaving them together. For a moment, a single, fleeting, perfect moment, it felt like a family. Not the one broken by tragedy. Not the one complicated by secrets, but the one quietly forming in the aftermath. After dinner, they sat in the living room again. The night had settled softly outside. The air calm, the world momentarily kind. Faye looked at Harrison. "Thank you for letting me be here. I didn't realize how much I needed this." Harrison's voice was gentle. "You're welcome here anytime." Ella climbed onto Faye's lap and whispered, You can come tomorrow, too. Faye held her close. I'd like that. Harrison watched them, the fragile healing bond forming before his eyes, and something inside him eased for the first time in years. A quiet truth whispered inside him. Maybe home isn't something you run from. Maybe it's something you find again, piece by fragile piece. And as the night settled around them, the first threads of something tender, something like family, something like love began to weave themselves quietly into place. The following evening in Norfolk carried the kind of calm that feels almost suspicious. Too still, too gentle, as if the wind itself was holding its breath. Harrison felt it the moment he stepped outside to take out the trash. A familiar whisper of unease crawled up the back of his neck. He knew better than to ignore instincts that had kept him alive through years most people would never hear about. Inside the house, the warmth of family life pulsed softly. Ella was coloring at the kitchen table, humming to herself. Faye sat beside her sipping tea, her posture relaxed, but her eyes occasionally drifting toward the window. She had been doing that a lot, watching shadows, listening for footsteps. The revelation of her past had left fractures in her heart. She was still learning to breathe around. Harrison returned indoors, closing the door with deliberate quiet. "Everything okay?" Faye asked, noticing the subtle shift in his shoulders. "For now," he said, brushing it aside. "Long day at work, that's all." But she didn't believe him. She had spent enough hours around trained personnel to recognize the tiny signs, the wariness, the slowed breathing, the quiet assessment of exits. He was reading the environment, and something was off. Faye stood, setting her mug down. "You're tense. Did something happen?" "No," he replied, then corrected himself. "Not yet." Their eyes met. That unspoken connection, delicate yet undeniable, flared again. A growing bond, intimate and intuitive. Ella, oblivious to the tension tightening the air, lifted her drawing. "Faye, look, I drew us at the beach." The innocently bright picture, 3 figures holding hands under a yellow sun, hit Faye with unexpected force. Part warmth, part ache. A future she never imagined suddenly felt possible. But that future was fragile. Too fragile for what was coming. When the sun dipped lower, Harrison drove Faye back to her apartment a few blocks from base housing. Ella was in the back seat, chattering about seashells and spaghetti sauce. Faye answered her with genuine warmth, but Harrison noticed the subtle restlessness in her fingers. When they reached her building, Faye unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to Harrison. "Thank you. For today. For dinner. For letting me fall apart a little." Harrison's voice softened. "You didn't fall apart. You allowed yourself to feel that strength." Her chest tightened. "I don't feel strong right now." "You don't have to," he said gently. "You just have to keep moving." Before she could respond, Ella reached forward and squeezed Faye's hand. "Are you coming by tomorrow?" Faye smiled. "If your dad doesn't mind." "I don't," Harrison said quietly. He meant it. More than she knew. Faye stepped out, waving as they drove off. She didn't know they wouldn't make it home before danger found her. It started with footsteps behind her. Soft. Measured. Purposeful. She had just reached the stairwell leading to her apartment when her instinct screamed. She turned casually, training kicking in, and saw nothing but a hallway bathed in the flickering glow of faulty fluorescent lights. No one, but someone had been there. She felt it. As she reached for her keys, a shadow lunged. Faye ducked instinctively as a heavy arm swung past her head. She dropped her bag, rolled, and sprang to her feet, heart slamming against her ribs. 2 men emerged from the dim hallway. Not Holt. Not Irwin. Worse. Men who moved with predatory coordination, professional hunters. Faye Emerson, one of them, said, "You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Her pulse spiked. The data, the hidden camera footage, the evidence she had gathered on the bus. She backed away slowly. "You're not getting it." "That's fine," the second man said. "We'll take you instead." They lunged. Faye fought. She wasn't Ghostline. She didn't have Harrison's eerie precision or lethal instinct. But she was Navy. She had grit. She blocked the first blow elbowed. The second assailant ducked under another swing. But they were stronger. Faster. The first man grabbed her by the wrist and pinned her against the wall. She choked on fear, not the childish kind, but the kind that tasted like failure. Then, a sound cut through the hall. A breath, a step, a presence. The man restraining her stiffened just long enough for her to catch it. The subtle shift of air pressure when someone incredibly skilled moves with purpose. Then, a blur. Harrison hit the first attacker with silent, devastating precision. No wasted motion. No visible anger. Just cold, controlled efficiency. The man dropped instantly, gasping for air. The second attacker swung wildly. Harrison didn't flinch. He pivoted, redirected the blow, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest. The attacker slammed into the wall, sliding to the floor in a heap. Silence filled the hallway, broken only by Faye's ragged breathing. Harrison stepped closer, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt, She swallowed hard. "I'm okay," but she wasn't. Not inside. Her body shook, her voice trembled, but what broke her was the look in his eyes, fierce, protective, terrified of losing her. "Faye," he said softly. "Why didn't you call me?" She laughed weakly. "Because I didn't know I needed you. Until right now." He reached out, brushing her trembling hands until they steadied. "Who were they?" he asked. "Holt and Irwin weren't working alone," she whispered. "The network they're tied to. They must have tracked me. They want the evidence." Harrison's jaw tightened. "And they'll come again." "Yes." He exhaled sharply. The weight of responsibility, of fear, of memories fell on him like old armor. Faye stepped closer. "Harrison, thank you. You saved my life." Again, he didn't answer. He simply pulled her gently into his arms, an instinctive protective embrace he didn't have time to think about. She leaned into him, gripping the fabric of his jacket, letting the fear drain out into the warmth of his presence. No words, no explanations. Just two wounded souls finding refuge in the only place that felt safe, in each other. After a long moment, he whispered, "You're not alone, Faye. Not anymore." Her eyes burned, maybe for the first time in her life. She believed it. Commander Helena Everett arrived at the Naval Clinic with the kind of urgency she usually reserved for national crises. Her steps were sharp, calculated, and yet when she pushed open the hallway door and saw Harrison sitting beside Faye on the small bench, her entire posture softened. Faye was shaken, but physically unharmed. Harrison sat close enough to protect her, but far enough to respect her space. Ella slept, curled on a chair nearby her head, resting against a folded jacket that clearly belonged to her father. For a moment, Helena simply stood still, absorbing the sight. Harrison Ghostline's quiet legend was sitting in a dimly lit hallway with a sleeping child and a traumatized young woman who needed him more than she understood. And he was exactly where he belonged. Faye lifted her eyes. "Mom." Helena knelt in front of her, taking her daughter's trembling hands into her own. "Tell me everything. Every detail." Faye did her voice steadying as she described the attack, the men, the struggle. And finally, she said the part that hit Helena like a silent earthquake. "He saved me, Mom. If he hadn't come when he did, I don't know if I'd still be." Helena squeezed her hands. "You're here. You're safe. That's what matters." When Faye finished recounting the events, Helena stood and turned toward Harrison. "You shouldn't have been there, you know." Harrison leaned back slightly, his eyes calm but unreadable. And you should know by now I go where I'm needed. Helena let out a breath she'd been holding. Harrison, you've saved me. You've saved Faye. Twice. I didn't do it for the Navy, he said quietly. I know. Helena approached him, her voice dropping into something more personal. You did it because it's who you are. Harrison didn't respond, not verbally, but the flicker of emotion in his eyes told her she was right. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze layered with 20 years of unspoken gratitude. I owe you more than formal thanks. But I'll start there, Harrison. Thank you. He looked down at his hands. You don't owe me anything, Helena. I do, she insisted. And not just for today, for the past, for Leah, for what you carried alone. The name Leah hung in the air with the weight of a memory that neither of them had ever fully faced together. Faye watched the two of them, sensing the depth of the wound they shared, though each carried it differently. Helena continued softly. You lost your wife because our system failed her, and we both know it. I've lived with that guilt for 20 years. Harrison's voice was low. It wasn't your fault. It was a mission, Helena whispered. My intel. My decision to send your team. I was responsible for your lives, and I lived while others didn't. That's not how it works, Harrison said, firmly meeting her eyes. The job breaks people. It's no one's fault. And everyone's. Helena inhaled deeply, steadying herself, but her voice trembled slightly when she spoke next. You could have hated me. You could have blamed me. But instead, you took care of my daughter when I couldn't. Faye stiffened. Mom Helena squeezed her hand gently. I'm not hiding anymore, sweetheart. She turned back to Harrison. You didn't just protect my child today. You protected her 20 years ago, too. You and Leah both. A long silence followed. Then Helena made a choice she had been holding back for decades. She bowed her head. A commander bowing to a janitor. A leader bowing to a ghost. A mother bowing to the man who saved her child twice. Thank you, Harrison Fordham, she said softly. For everything. Faye gasped quietly. Ella stirred in her sleep. Harrison blinked in surprise, even discomfort. He stood quickly, shaking his head. Helena, don't do that. I needed to, she replied, because some debts are deeper than rank. He swallowed hard, emotion tightening his jaw. I didn't save her for gratitude. I saved her because she deserves to live. Faye stepped forward, then her voice small but steady. And because you care. Harrison didn't respond, but the truth was etched across his face. Helena crossed her arms, studying him. Harrison! Faye is in real danger now. They won't stop. You know that. I know, he said. And you also know, Helena continued slowly, that I can't protect her the way you can. Faye turned sharply. Mom, I can protect myself. No, Helena said softly, cupping her daughter's cheek. You're brave, strong, but these aren't street thugs. They're professionals. Shadows. Harrison's eyes darkened with recognition. Ghost-line shadows. The kind of enemy he understood too well. Helena took a breath, then looked him straight in the eyes. I can't force you to come back. I know you won't. But Harrison, at least for now, will you help protect my daughter? The question landed heavy. Faye stared at them both, heart pounding. Harrison looked at Ella, still sleeping peacefully. Then he looked at Faye, the young woman he once held as an infant, the grown officer he had saved twice, the person who had quietly started stitching pieces of him back together just by being near. He exhaled slowly. I'll help, he said. Faye's breath hitched. Helena nodded a quiet acceptance, a mother's relief. Thank you. But she wasn't done. She stepped closer, her voice softer, warmer. And Harrison. He raised an eyebrow. Helena smiled, subtle, knowing, maternal. Sometimes the best families are the ones we find after the storms. The words lingered in the air as the three adults stood together, bound by past wounds, present danger, and a future none of them had expected. A future quietly, slowly forming into something that looked very much like home. The morning sun over Norfolk carried a gentleness that felt almost like a blessing. Warm calm, the kind of quiet that greeted a person not with silence, but with peace. Harrison Fordham hadn't felt that kind of morning in years, maybe decades. And yet, today felt different. Ella ran ahead of him on the sand, barefoot, her laughter bubbling into the sea breeze. She chased the tide as it rolled in, squealing when the water chased her back. She was sunlight in human form, bright, innocent, unbroken. Faye walked beside Harrison, her steps slower, thoughtful. She wore a soft sweater against the cool ocean air, her hair pulled back loosely, her eyes reflecting both the waves and the storms she had survived. Between them was a stillness that wasn't empty. It was comfortable, healing, a quiet after all the noise. Ella's got more energy than the sun, Faye said, smiling. She always has, Harrison replied, watching his daughter with a tenderness Faye never tired of seeing. Can't keep her still. Wonder who she gets that from, Faye teased lightly. Harrison pretended not to hear, but the faint upward pull of his lips gave him away. Faye's heart warmed. A week had passed since the attack. A week of reports, debriefings, arrests, and the slow unraveling of the network Holt and Irwin belonged to. A week of Faye staying close, not because she needed protection, but because something inside her instinctively kept pulling her toward Harrison and Ella. The three of them had slipped into a rhythm neither had expected. Shared dinners, walks at dusk. Ella insisting Faye sit beside her during movie nights. Harrison quietly making tea for Faye, without asking what she liked, yet somehow making it perfectly. And Faye beginning to understand a truth she had spent her entire life searching for. Family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was presence, kindness, a steady heartbeat beside your own. She exhaled softly, letting the ocean wind carry away the remnants of fear still lingering inside her. Harrison glanced at her. Rough night, Faye nodded. Nightmares. Not as bad as before. You're sleeping, he said gently. That's something. It is, she murmured. Thanks to you. He did not respond. He never accepted praise easily, not for the things that mattered. But the look he gave her held meaning. Warmth. A sense of connection too deep to name. Ella came running back, her small hand, slipping into Faye's. Auntie Faye, come look, there's a tiny crab. Faye froze. Auntie. Harrison looked away, a little embarrassed, but didn't correct Ella. He simply waited. Faye knelt and squeezed Ella's hand gently. I'd love to see it. The child beamed. Harrison's heart tightened in his chest. The world had taken much from him, his wife, his career, his peace. But somehow, impossibly, it was giving something back. As the sun climbed higher, Commander Helena Everett appeared at the edge of the dunes. She walked with her usual confidence, but something in her softened when she saw her daughter laughing in the surf with Ella. Morning, Helena said as she approached Harrison. Commander? He greeted, though his voice carried less formality now. You don't have to call me that, Helena said gently. Not here. Harrison nodded once, accepting the truce. They watched the girls together. She looks happy, Helena murmured. She deserves to be, Harrison replied. Helena exhaled the ocean wind, carrying the sound away. I used to imagine a moment like this, she said quietly. A moment where she could just be a daughter again. Not a mission. Not an officer. Just Faye. Harrison studied her. Helena continued, her voice barely above the waves. I know I made mistakes. With her. With you. with ghostline. I can't fix the past. No one can, Harrison said softly. But Helena said, her voice steadying. I can bless the future. He turned to her, a question in his eyes. Helena's gaze settled on him, steady, respectful, full of a mother's gratitude. Harrison, if my daughter chooses to build a life that crosses paths with yours, you have my blessing. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 20 years. Harrison looked back at the beach at Faye, laughing as Ella insisted she chase the tiny crab again. Sunlight wrapped around them like a promise. He swallowed. Thank you, he said quietly. Helena nodded. She could do far worse than a man who saved her life twice, and a dozen times before she ever knew it. Harrison didn't answer, but inside something long buried, something he thought had died. With Leah shifted, opened, warmed. Hope. Fragile, new, but real. Minutes later, Faye returned to him, cheeks flushed from the wind. She stopped in front of him, eyes bright. Harrison, she murmured, can we stay a little longer? He looked at her, and every moment of the past week flickered in his mind. Every shared glance, every quietly spoken truth, every time she reached for him without fear. Yes, he said softly. We can stay. She stepped closer, standing beside him, as Ella built a crooked sandcastle nearby. The breeze lifted Faye's hair. Harrison reached out, hesitated for a heartbeat, and then gently tucked a strand behind her ear. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the touch anchor her. When she opened them, her voice trembled with something honest, fragile and bold. Harrison, after everything that's happened, after everything I've learned, I'm starting to think that maybe I didn't lose a family 20 years ago. He inhaled, chest tightening. Maybe she whispered, I just found them now. He didn't speak. He simply reached for her hand. Faye's fingers curled into his, delicate at first, then sure. They stood together, facing the ocean, as the morning stretched before them, bright new healing. Ella ran toward them, breathless. Come see my castle has a bridge? Faye laughed. We're coming, she tugged Harrison gently, and he followed slowly, willingly toward a future that felt less like a dream and more like something he could finally believe in. As they knelt beside Ella's crooked sandcastle, Faye leaned her head gently against Harrison's shoulder and whispered 4 words that made his heart still. You brought us home, and for the first time in years, Harrison let himself believe that maybe the dawn ahead was theirs. Together, before we say goodbye, we would love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Your comments always bring so much warmth to this community, and we truly enjoy reading every single one of them. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or simply gave you a moment of peace, today, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful stories filled with kindness, courage, and hope. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for spending your time with us. We're grateful to have you here, and we hope to see you again in the next story.